Happy Friday, beer runners, and welcome to the latest edition of the iRunOnBeer Friday 5. For this week's episode, I wanted to focus on how to improve as a runner, and specifically the lens that I wanted to look at to discuss that is my running and how I've improved over the last 5 years, to talk about some of the key changes that I made in my lifestyle, in my running, in my training, etc., that have gotten me to where I am today. And the reason that I wanted to do that is because something pretty special happened to me this week, and that is that I hit the 1,000 mile mark for 2019 for my annual miles for the first time ever. Last year was the closest that I've ever come at just over 900, but the fact that I'm already at 1,000 miles for 2019 and it's only October is crazy to me. So what I wanted to do is talk about how I've been able to improve so much over the last 5 years, and like I said, just walk you through year to year from 2015 to 2019, talk about some of my statistics, some of my data from year to year, and again, discuss some of those key factors that led to those incremental changes, and then some really more significant changes, especially over the last couple of years. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you find it helpful, and I hope you can use some of these tips to influence your training. What I use to gather all of these statistics is actually, if you watch my episode from last week, some of my favorite running apps and websites is SmashRun.com. It's a totally free service, but what I said in my last video, what I love about SmashRun is you can pull all of your data from throughout time, from throughout your time as a runner, and even if you sign up for SmashRun now, it will automatically, if you sync it with Strava or Garmin or whatever you use, it will pull all of that historical data. So I just find it to be the best website. I'm not sponsored by them or anything like that, but just for long-term data, it gives you all kinds of graphs, plots, averages, and just shows you, like I said, your cumulative running, I guess, from whenever you started, whenever you first logged your run, or whenever you logged your first run until now. So a great way to kind of look back through the years. So let's turn back the clock and kick things off with 2015. My total annual mileage for 2015 was only 157 miles. That is almost a tenth of what I will probably run this year. I'm expecting, hopefully, since I'm at 1,000 now, to get close to about 1,300, maybe a little bit higher. We'll see how things go. But the fact that just 5 years ago my annual mileage was only 157 miles astounds me. What's crazier to me than that overall mileage number is that 50 of those miles came from January alone. So basically, I stacked the first month of the year and then just did nothing for the rest of the year. And there's some reason for that. I ran the Rock and Roll New Orleans half marathon in, I think it was actually the first weekend in February or end of January. Usually falls sometime in that range. So I do remember I was in grad school at the time. This was my first big race that I was training for since college. It was only my second half marathon, and I actually did put in the training for this race, specifically because my first half marathon ever in college was terrible. I didn't train for it at all, and I destroyed my legs. So put in the training, put the miles in, had some solid runs, and actually ran a solid, I think it was a 1:49 was my time for that race. So very excited about that time, had a great race, and then celebrated by barely running for the rest of the year. Just some other numbers for you in 2015. On average, I was running only 1 day a week, so again, kind of gives you a snapshot of what my running career looked like in 2015, and my average run distance was right around the 3-mile mark. Another number that I want to pay particular attention to as we go year to year is what my average pace per mile was throughout all of my runs throughout the year. So for 2015, I was hovering right around a 9-minute mile. So I want to have you keep that in mind as we kind of go through the years, because I think you'll see a little bit of a pattern, which we'll touch on later. 2016, Ryan, saw a lot of improvement from 2015, and that was in large part because I had caught the half marathon bug. I had so much fun at Rock and Roll New Orleans. I actually had put in the training, so it was great to see how a half marathon could go if you were well trained for it. And so I actually ended up running 3 half marathons in 2016. Rock and Roll New Orleans again in the spring, Rock and Roll Philly in September, and then Rock and Roll Brooklyn in October. But the trajectory of those races is something that I want to pay close attention to. So I actually ended up running 238 miles in 2016, so a big improvement from the year before. But if you look at my averages, I was still only averaging 1.4 runs per week. My average run was just over 3 miles, 3.1 miles, but my pace did come down. My average pace dropped down to an 8:42, so I was starting to add some speed to my training. But the numbers that I want to focus on is the paces, or the times that I actually got for those half marathons. So Rock and Roll New Orleans, 1:55, significantly, not significantly, but a fair amount slower than the year before. And that was just because I had remembered the past year and how much fun I had. The race felt a lot easier to me because I had trained. But mentally, I was like, oh, I've got this half marathon distance down. I've run 2 of them before. I don't have to train it as hard. And that definitely showed in my pace and also how horrible my legs felt after the race yet again. Then we go towards Philly. Philly, I had sort of learned from my mistakes. I tried to train, but it was right at the end of the summer. And again, I slacked off a lot during training for this race. I thought that my previous experience and just that I was running more would carry me through. It was also brutally hot on race day, and I ran a 1:59. That's the closest I've ever come to not breaking the 2-hour mark during a half marathon. And I just remember feeling awful after that race mentally, just because I was disappointed in myself for not putting in the training. I remember finishing and just being really frustrated with how hard I had to try just to get anywhere close to my goal time. I just remember the whole, especially the last mile, saying, I don't want to finish over 2 hours. I don't want to finish over 2 hours, and just really struggling to finish that race. But then luckily for Brooklyn, although it's not too big of an improvement, I did consistently train for the month between Philly and Brooklyn to try to get my fitness up and try to really better prepare for that race, and ended up running a 1:52, but also felt a lot better at the end of that race. And so this sort of started to help me prepare, or help me learn, okay, I do really need to train for this. But as you'll learn in my first race the next year, I definitely didn't learn that lesson all the way. So let's jump into 2017. 2017 rolls around, and this was really my first year where I started to take my training a lot more seriously, and also got a lot more consistent with my running. I wasn't just loading in the miles for a training cycle, running a race, and then taking off for a month, taking off for a couple weeks, and then having to start over, rebuild a base before the next training cycle. 2017 was really the first year where I was consistently running throughout the entire year. And that shows in my annual mileage. I actually set a goal for myself of running 365 miles. For the last 2 years, I had set goals of running 500 miles. In my head, I was like, that's an achievable goal. I want to run 500 miles in a year. And as you can see, I came nowhere close in 2015, 2016. So 2017 rolls around, I said, all right, I'm just going to set a goal of running at least a mile every day. Not actually running a mile every single day, but I want my average to be 365 miles for the year. And I broke that down into months. So every month I'm going to run at least 30, 31 miles, or 28 for February. But I just want to be at least averaging a mile a day for every single month. So that paid off huge, and I actually ended up breaking the 500 mile mark and ran 571 miles. This in large part, again, is due to the fact that I was consistently running throughout the year, as opposed to just loading in the miles during training cycles and then slacking off for the rest of the time. As far as races are concerned, it was another 3 half marathon year. If you couldn't tell, I'm a diehard fan of the rock and roll races. I really love them, especially since they offer the Tour Pass, where you can get 3 runs for a single price, and then you can run any 3 of their races under that Tour Pass that you purchase. So that's why I ran 3 the 2 years, for those 2 years, just because I purchased that package and had 3 races to burn. So started off with Rock and Roll New Orleans. If you hadn't been able to tell by now, that's by far one of my favorite races of all time. I'm actually hoping to run the marathon in 2020, so we'll see how that goes. It's a month after Bandera, so still debating whether or not that's a good choice, especially if I want to shoot for another marathon PR, but we'll see how that goes. But ran New Orleans, and once again, as I said, hadn't fully learned my lesson about needing to actually put in solid training. And again, this is early in 2017, so before that consistent training, Ryan really got off the ground, and I ran a 1:59. And again, brutally sore after the race. My legs hurt, everything was sore, and that was really the moment where I was like, okay, I need to stop signing up for these races just to sign up for them and not actually putting in the work. And that's really when my mental preparation changed, when looking especially at half marathon, marathon distance races, just needing to really focus on training and putting in the miles so that I felt good on race day, and the whole race wasn't just a mental battle of you put yourself in this situation, what have you done, etc. Really focusing on getting in those healthy miles throughout the year, so the half marathons became a lot easier, more comfortable, and overall more fun. And that definitely paid off later in the year. I ran Rock and Roll Montreal, which was a blast, and ran that one in 1:51. I was particularly proud of that time because there was a heat wave in Montreal. They actually canceled the full marathon because of how hot it was, and bumped the start time of the half marathon an hour earlier to hopefully get most of, or a significant amount of the run in before before sunrise, or before the sun was too high and the temperatures were too high. And they also had water cool down stations throughout the entire course because it was so hot. So the fact that I was able to run a 151 given how hot it was, very excited about that. And then even more excited when I towed the line at Rock and Roll Las Vegas in November. Again, a huge race, a lot of fun. If you ever have the chance to run Rock and Roll Las Vegas, I can't recommend it highly enough. But I ran a 146 at that race, which was my PR at the time, and I felt amazing after the race because I had put in that training. I felt strong running that race. There was no point where I was really struggling mentally or physically, just overall felt great, and my training throughout the year had paid off. Just some other statistics to go over. So my average runs were 2.9 runs per week, so pretty much double from the year before, again, because I was running a lot more consistently. My average run was 3.7 miles, and then my average pace actually dropped down to 8:33. So starting to add a lot more speed work and starting to run my training runs a lot more quickly. So with that said, let's move on to 2018 to see how that number, especially, like I said, I want to focus on how that changed over the last 2 years. So 2018 rolls around, I am feeling amazing as a runner. I am fully embracing the runner lifestyle. 2017 was when I first joined the Bib Brave Pros, so 2018 was my first full year as part of the team, and I was just loving diving in headfirst to running. Loving seeing the benefit of consistent training, and loving just talking about running and being involved in running with other people who were as enthusiastic as I am about the sport. So I decided to set an even more ambitious goal for myself. The year before, I set that 1 mile a day average throughout the entire year. So you know what, 2018, I'm going for 730 miles for the year was the goal. Breaking it down by month, every month I wanted to average 2 miles a day. Again, not actually running 2 miles every single day, but at the end of every month having an average of having completed 2 miles every day. And that definitely paid off, as you'll see. My running got a lot more consistent, even more consistent than the year before, but there are still definitely some areas to improve. So the spring was really defined by training for my first full marathon, and what I was so proud of with this accomplishment was the fact that winter was really the time when I had the hardest time training for a race because of how brutally cold it is, especially with the lack of sunlight. Like, I just didn't enjoy training in the winter. It was very difficult for me to put in a solid effort during that season. And the fact that I was able to get through an 18-week training program for my first marathon, running longer than I ever had before, especially those 15, 16, 17-mile long runs on the weekends, putting that in every single week. I remember struggling through that, but also just enjoying putting in that work, and it definitely paid off on race day. Although I just missed my goal of 4 hours, missed it by 19 seconds, I do remember getting to the starting line, people asking me, you know what, are you excited? You've been training for months for this, how are you feeling? And I was like, I was excited for the race, but honestly, I was more proud of just making it through that training cycle. It was longer than any training that I'd ever done, and like I said, running runs longer than I had ever run before. I was just so happy that I had made it. So I might have missed that goal by 19 seconds, but I knew there would be more marathons in my future, so I wasn't too upset about it. My other significant races to point out throughout that year: Rock and Roll Raleigh, I ran in the spring. I ran it supposedly as a fun run, as a training run right before my marathon. Wasn't planning on running it fast, and ended up setting a new PR. Again, just because my mileage was climbing, I was more consistent as a runner, so my fitness, I was just seeing that improvement without even pushing myself for a PR, and I shaved 3 minutes off of my Vegas time on a much more difficult and much more hilly course as opposed to the dead flat of Vegas. Then in the fall, my big goal race was Rock and Roll Philadelphia, just the half marathon. I really wanted to see how I could push myself to run, like what kind of time I could run if I really trained to set a PR. And this was the first time I started to add speed work to my training and strength work as well. Again, it paid off. It was brutally hot on that course that day, but I ran a 1:38, so shaved obviously a significant amount of time off of my previous PR from Raleigh earlier that year, and again, just felt amazing. I actually threw up on course from Philly because of the heat and the finish line, so the fact that I was still able to hit a 1:38, I'm incredibly proud of, and that's definitely a goal I want to set my sights on, I think, for 2020, is to, again, I'm so much further ahead of myself where I was when I ran that race last year. I want to see what I can do next year as far as a half marathon PR. Just to go over some of the numbers from 2018, like I said, I set that goal of running an average of 2 miles a year, so 730 miles for the entire year. crushed that again and ran 911 miles. So again, a huge increase from the year before because I was running a lot more consistently week to week. Where I wasn't running as consistently was day to day, so I was still only running an average of 2.9 runs per week. Usually it was 2 runs during the week and then my long run on the weekends. I remember my training plan, especially for the marathon, usually had a 3rd run built in during the week. I often would miss one of the 2 or 3 mile kind of recovery runs and would just sit around. So that's something that I've definitely improved upon in 2019. But the other things that did improve were my average run length jumped up to 5.7 miles, so a huge increase from the year before. And what I really want to focus on is where my pace went. So for the last few years, my pace had been decreasing. I was getting faster and faster as far as my average pace throughout the year. 2018 was the first time that slowed back down. 8:51 was my average pace. And the reason that I like that number and like it even more in 2019 is because that shows that you don't have to be running your training runs as hard as you plan to run a race. It is just as important to get in those slow recovery runs to allow your legs just to spend time on feet, but also allow your legs to recover, so when you are putting in those hard effort runs, you can run a lot harder than if you were running every single run around an 8.5 minute pace for me. So I vary a lot in my paces in training now, and I'm just so happy that I've started to incorporate those really slow miles so that I can really push myself during those speed workouts. On to 2019, where again I'm seeing massive improvement in my running, and I do have to pause for a moment and just credit so much of that improvement to my coach. I don't necessarily think everyone needs a coach. I know it's not for everyone, and I know it can be a high expense, but I just have to say my experience signing up with a running coach at the end of 2018 has been incredible for me. The fact that my mileage has skyrocketed so much and not only climbed so high, but also the fact that I've been able to run so consistently throughout the year, put in some solid race efforts throughout this year, and also been able to stay healthy. I think the biggest impact that having a coach has had on my running has been just keeping me accountable and keeping me consistent, so I'm not skipping those midweek runs. I'm getting every single run in and feeling good about it. Helping to deal with old injuries or making sure those injuries don't come up, and if injuries do come up, it's so helpful having a coach. So instead of where I might just say like, you know what, my knee's a little sore today, I'm just going to take some days off, he's able to tweak my training to allow me to a lot of times continue to run, but also finding exercises where I'm able to maintain my fitness while helping that whatever that injury might be to recover, so that I'm not falling behind and having to start back over. So again, I know coaching might not be for everyone, but for me personally, I think you'll see in the numbers from 2019 just how big of an improvement it has had on my life. I also, in every video, I think have the link to my coach's information if you are interested in a running coach. So just a caveat if that's something that you're looking for. But in 2018, I came so close to the 1,000-mile mark. I knew I had to break it in 2019. And as I mentioned at the start of this video, I am at 1,039 miles right now, and we're only just before midway through October. So obviously going to crush my mileage from last year, going to smash that 1,000-mile goal, and owe that again in large part to my coach, and just so excited with how far I've come in just a year. As far as racing is concerned, my biggest race this year was running the Rock and Roll DC Marathon. Since I missed that 4-hour mark last year by 19 seconds, all that I was focused on in the fall, in the spring, and in the early winter months this year was just getting across that finish line at Rock and Roll DC, breaking that 4-hour marathon. My racing was actually a lot lighter this year because of how zeroed in I was on that goal, and I'm happy to say I did break the 4-hour mark. I ran a 3:53:08, super excited about that time. Not only excited about that time, but excited by the fact that I was able to walk and even jog a little bit the day after the race. My legs felt okay, and the DC course had some brutal hills on it. So the fact that I was able to run so consistently and put in such a solid race effort despite the elevation change on that course, so impressed with that race time and so excited to again see how I can continue to improve my marathon time. As far as other metrics, I haven't raced a lot this year. I've done some fun runs and things like that, but as I've said in videos before, my mind is now set on running my first ultra, so I am just so zeroed in on that. I don't necessarily want to risk anything by taking on any other races, but luckily that will be in January, and once that's done, I'll start setting my sights on future goals. But just to go over some other numbers from this year, as I mentioned, the 1,039 overall miles. I am averaging 3.9 runs per week. So again, added another day from last year. So usually running 3 days during the week, one on the weekend, and I think that number is actually increasing a lot because I'm getting to the point in ultra training where I'm usually running 3 days a week and then running both days on the weekend as well. So hoping to see that number continue to climb throughout the end of the year. My average run is up to 6.2 miles, so putting in a lot longer runs even during the week. A huge thing that's had an impact on that is just switching my runs to the morning. I have more time in the morning. I do have to wake up earlier, but it's a lot easier to get in those longer runs before work as opposed to getting home tired from the day and having to go out for a 6, 7, 8, even 10-mile run sometimes. So morning running has been a huge improvement just in terms of my consistency and being able to log those longer mile runs. And then lastly, the pace. Like I said, what I really wanted to focus on was where my pace has come over the last 5 years. My average pace this year is a 9:40 mile, which may sound so slow, but that is again because I'm putting in those long, slow recovery miles so that when my coach does want me to run those speed efforts, I have that ability, I have that energy stored up. So that's a number that I really like to see, is the fact that I'm continuing to speed up so much in my race efforts, but my average pace throughout the year has actually slowed down by almost a minute over the last year. Just something to consider when you're thinking about how hard you should be training and what paces you should be shooting for during your training runs. So there you have it, a somewhat brief walk down memory lane. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too much, but I do tend to get just a little overexcited going back through previous race experiences, all my past running statistics, and just reliving kind of where I was at as a runner over the last 5 years. I just wanted to kind of walk through those 5 years to hopefully tell those stories so maybe you see or recognize some attributes that you might have now or things that you might want to change for the future so that you could see how I've improved, so hopefully it might help you continue to improve. The biggest recommendation that I can make, or the biggest thing that I've definitely noticed just looking over the raw data, is how much more consistent my running has become and being able to aid that by adding people to hold me accountable. So groups of runners like the Bib Brave Pros or having a coach has been huge, of just holding me accountable to make sure that I'm running more consistently throughout the week and putting in those longer, more consistent mile runs as well. That's one of the biggest changes throughout the last 5 years, is how long I'm running on every run, but also how many days I'm running per week. The other big improvement that I've seen is just in my pacing. So again, learning to train at different paces is something I really didn't start doing until the very tail end of 2018, most of 2019, and again, that's just something that my coach has been helping me with. Learning that it's okay to run recovery runs at a 10, 11, sometimes 12-minute pace. Just really taking those slow recovery miles to allow your legs to rebuild so that when I'm running those tempo runs, those running intervals, I'm able to push the pace to a 6-minute mile, sometimes under that. How variable my pace is this year especially has just been incredible to see. So I hope you at least learned something from this video. Like I said, I tend to ramble a little bit talking about my stories. I think I'm doing it a little bit now, but just really enjoyed looking over the data. If you want to look over some of your own long-term data, again, that website I talked about is smashrun.com. That's what I use to look at all my long-term running data. And if you ever want to look at just all of your past race results in one location, one web page, check out athlinks.com as well. That's one that I recommended on the last video, where it just collects all of your race data on one singular profile, so you don't have to go back and forth to every single individual race's website to find your results. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. Please let me know what you're doing now to continue to improve your running, or if you've made changes in the past where you've seen significant jumps in your mileage or significant jumps in terms of your race performance. Always would love to hear what tips other people have. So thanks for tuning in. Again, I hope this video wasn't too long. I'm sure it's going to end up being one of the longer ones, but I appreciate you stopping by. Congratulations on making it through the video and making it through this week. You made it until Friday, so you've earned the weekend. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.